Red light, green light, red light, green light, red light, green light, red light, green light, red light.
Well, it may be the winter period, it may be the cold times, it may be -2 in Scotland, but nonetheless, we're here for another episode of the Soul Sessions. Of course, with me as always, your host Soul. With me today, well, quite an important man. He's the former assistant general manager of NXT UK, Sid Scala. Welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you very much, sir. Good to be here.
Oh, hey, Sid's an absolute pleasure to have you on, my friend. But of course, why do, Sid, with every guest has a story. Every story has a beginning. Sid, how did your story begin as a wrestling fan?
Oh, as a wrestling fan, I couldn't actually tell you because it's one of those ones where I guess before you even really develop memories, you start finding things that you like. For me, it was like Batman, pirates, and wrestling. Those were like my things, So I was like dressed up in my little ears, Batman ears, or with an eye patch, or trying to be Hulk Hogan or Steve Austin or whoever it was. But I had a kind of interesting start. We didn't have Sky or anything when I was younger. We didn't have a lot of access to WWF, WCW much. But my mum worked with a wrestler, which was like kind of mind blowing at the time because I was like, what? But yeah, like my mum worked as an accountant, and someone who sat literally opposite her desk was a wrestler for FWA, which was like, I guess if you compare them to a modern promotion, they'd be kind of like the Progress of their day. They were like one of the Progress or the Rev Pro kind of thing. They're one of the biggest independent companies in the UK at the time. And he was one of the wrestlers, Scott Parker was his name. And he heard from my mum, oh, my son started enjoying a bit of wrestling. He's taken an interest in it. So he went, oh, okay, cool. And the next day he brought in VHS tapes from WrestleMania 2 all the way till WrestleMania 7 and all of the Survivor Series and Rumbles in between. So I got given this kind of stack of VHSs, which I just rinse and repeat, watched all the time, and it kind of forged the kind of foundation for the rest of my life, I guess. I've been obsessed with it ever since, So yeah, that's my start as a fan.
Hey, fair dues. I bet that tape recorder was nearly burnt out with how many times you rewind those tapes.
Yeah, we got through a few VHSs for sure. Like the tapes are still okay though. Luckily, I stumbled across them the other day and I was like, oh look, here they are. Like the proper original Silvervision ones. I don't know if they're worth anything, but it was just cool to see them all and think about how kind of important they were for the rest of my life, really.
Well, he said, I don't know, those old Disney VHSs apparently are worth a couple grand. So I don't know, maybe you've got some relics of the past that people may want.
I didn't know that. I have to look into it, but I don't know if I'd even sell them, to be honest. But never know. I give them to my kid or something.
Oh, pass it down the line, the generation to the next. But of course, you mentioned obviously tapes. And when I've spoken to UK wrestlers in particular, I've always fascinated about this era of tape trading, trading through tapes and learning about other companies. You might have learned about ECW for the first time through, or WCW.
Yeah.
I feel like tape trading is so integral to UK wrestling culture because that's how the scene really built, and the knowledge of it and the history behind it as well. So just your thoughts on tape trading within its UK wrestling culture. Do you think it is an integral part to the culture?
I think without it certainly, you'd know for certain there wouldn't have been like a Progress, for example, because like Jim Smallman's spoken so much about how he always did his tape trading back in the day, and he would get these like obscure Japanese shows, and it really formed his taste and what he enjoys about wrestling, and what kind of piqued his passion for it. And the FWA, I just mentioned earlier, like there's actually someone who is part of FWA who had a giant table of just all of the Ring of Honor, ECW, like obscure like house shows from ECW, and just like wild stuff that you just couldn't believe. Like as a fan going to these shows, like I didn't have the internet at the time. I would imagine most of the audience probably wouldn't have the internet in their homes, and just having like these random ECW house shows and seeing people like Rob Van Dam on top of the bill and thinking like, oh my God, and like, going home and watching them. And yeah, I think it was before the internet, it was kind of the hub for hardcore wrestling fans and people that were just completely like locked in with that being their main kind of passion in life. That was the platform for it. You know what I mean? Like that was the place that was the community.
Absolutely. It does build the community, because if you know somebody has a tape, you get in contact, you build that regular contact. I have something rare. Ooh, you have something rare. Let's trade it, and then build our knowledge upon, wrestling culture itself. But do you think, obviously, with modernization of wrestling through streaming and less on television, and there's less that element of even trading DVDs in nowadays, do you think that's a lost part of the culture?
Yeah, I guess the internet in many ways, not just in wrestling, but just like across the board of all art, whether it be film or music and things like that. Like as soon as things like Spotify turned up, for example, like I reckon there's a lot of people now who are, adults working, who maybe never even had that experience of somebody giving them a CD and being like, hey, check this band out, because it's always been available to them, right? Which is crazy to me, because obviously I love music as well. And, I worked in music before I went into wrestling properly. And like that was such a big part of growing up for me, was like, hey, here's an album, like here, like burn it onto your computer and then give it back kind of thing. You know what I mean? And you put it on your MP3 player and stuff like that. But it definitely, the internet as a whole is an incredible thing, because the access to everything is just incredible. Like it's such a positive thing for wrestling, but also just everything. It's just such a huge positive thing that everything can be so interlinked. But it definitely does take a little bit of that, I guess, need for like a little bit of human interaction and human connection amongst fandoms and stuff, because you can just basically tell someone about something in a text and that's it, and then you've basically done the same thing, but without that kind of act of actually giving someone something. And I guess in a way, like a bit of a shame that some people have never done that and will never do that in their lives,
Yeah, there's the physicality aspect of it, of actually, traveling to meet up with somebody and having that physical exchange. You think of the old days when you have that big booklet of just random CDs, no cases, and you're like, it's the car journey. What are we picking today? Oh, this is some classics right here. Put them on. But you mentioned, obviously, working in music before wrestling, and I'd love to touch upon that. And your thoughts on, obviously, the current state of the music industry. You mentioned stuff like there's Spotify, there's Deezers for streaming platforms, but it feels like it's more accessible for bands now than ever to get their stuff out there. Just your thoughts on the current state of music.
I mean, it certainly is more accessible. You can do self-release stuff now incredibly, like, easily. Just with a little bit of money, you can basically completely self-release an album, which 20 years ago you just couldn't do. Spotify is great. I use it every day, and I'm sure most people do, like Apple Music and all that stuff. I'm sure people use that stuff every day. That's kind of part of culture at this point. But it's like, I saw someone share something the other day they said that they're quite a small artist in the grand scheme of things, and they said that my 14 paid Patreon subscribers earned me more money in 2024 than my 360,000 streams on Spotify. And if you think about that for a second, like if you quantify that to say the 90s, like 360,000 CD sales, which is effectively the equivalent, right? Like if nowadays, if 360,000 people listen to a song, the only way to have done that back in the day would be by buying it and putting it in your CD player in your car or whatever. So like the difference in that is insane. So there's like, I can't necessarily comment on the entire state of the music industry because I've been removed from it since 2017, but at least like from a live music standpoint and like a streaming standpoint, it's a lot more difficult than it used to be. But I think hopefully that will change soon, because I, again, don't know all the details, but I've read a few things recently about the UK government trying to put some money back into independent music venues, and just basically smaller capacity venues across the country. I think the idea is that they're going to take a certain percentage of every arena or stadium music event sale or like big event sale, and they're going to feed that into like a fund for independent venues. Because I mean, at least in London, like more than half the music venues in London are gone now. So it's, it's definitely something that, over the last few years has been difficult for people.
Yeah, no, of course, absolutely. And seeing even like your local indie bands at whatever venue, it could be like a small pub or a wee small arena, it has that history with it with the local community, and a lot of people will connect with that. And that's such a fascinating aspect of it. as well. But we've obviously seen with music, like the Taylor Swift Eras tours, the biggest moneymaker tour. Coldplay have been doing a good tour that's made a lot of money. Even Oasis coming back and making Ticketmaster crumble under its own pressure. I mean, that's just Ticketmaster at the end of the day. But seeing these bands, in particular, have these big, massive, long tours, and then generating that amount of revenue, and obviously the band connectivity of it as well. Just your thoughts on that ability of music to still have such a vast, wide audience.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff's just incredible. And like there's certainly like, and in wrestling too, there's some incredible stuff going on from a numbers perspective and an attendance perspective. Even on an independent level too, which is just brilliant. And I think maybe that comes a little bit with coming off the back of the pandemic and everyone's kind of settling back into going out and doing things and being, back in the kind of routine of being out and amongst it and seeing friends and all that kind of stuff. But no, it's great. I've also seen like a lot of tours be pulled as well, and some big bands too, some big artists. I've seen some tours like be postponed or cancelled and stuff, and you don't know for a fact because they wouldn't necessarily say it on their press releases and stuff, but you hear that it's due to lack of sales and things like that. So it's like, I don't know, it's just it's a really interesting time. I think there are people that are almost like the outliers, like I don't think you can really put Taylor Swift into the conversation or an Oasis into the conversation of like the music industry generally, just because they're so huge.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like if we're talking about WWE and we talk about The Rock, for example, it's like he's an entity outside of that, if that makes sense. So none of the same kind of considerations can really be applied to him, if you get what I mean. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly an interesting kind of developing time in the moment, and it feels like a bit of a transitional stage in all of entertainment and in all of kind of all medias, film, TV, wrestling, everything.
Yeah, no, truly transcends as well, and it's the joy of music. You can listen to a band from Japan or Sweden or that. You may not understand the lyrics, but the beat, the instrumental, and just the passion behind the vocalists can make you have that feeling of connection. Do you think with music it's one of the most wide spectrum media outlets that is able to transcend language and make people feel?
Yeah, and I would also say when I was listening to you make that comment about the not knowing the language, that's kind of one of the most beautiful things about wrestling, is that once the bell rings, really, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, right? Because it's a physical performance, like art form, like and that's another thing that's been great about the internet for wrestling, is that it's created such a, I guess, like a, what's the word, like the styles are so much more of a mix now everywhere in the world, whether you're in America, whether you're in the UK. It's not just like that's the European style, that's the American style, that's the Japanese style, that's the Mexican, like lucha libre style. It's like now there's like a hybrid globally, because everyone's aware of everything, because we can just tap on our laptops or our phones and we're watching something from a completely different part of the world, and we have access to that every second of every day. But yeah, 100% agree with you on the music front, but I just think that it's really interesting you mentioned about the not even understanding the words, because with wrestling, obviously there's the commentary, but like beyond that, like it's just completely universal, and that's such a magical thing.
Universal's a magic thing. Things can transcend the borders of countries and make people feel right across the world. But obviously coming back to the UK itself, and we'll let the music fans go in the corner and bring back the wrestling fans. Come back, folks, come back. And we'll talk obviously about the British wrestling scene itself. I've always been fascinated, as somebody who got into wrestling in 2019 and not really seeing the early days of it, even past the 2010s to the early 2000s, of the evolution of the scene. When I've talked to people on and talked about when they got in, every point is different with how the scene was in itself. Sid, obviously your thoughts on the British wrestling scene and how it's evolved and developed over time.
Well, it's kind of like I guess like all industries, if there's always like ebbs and flows. When I started, it was what many people would refer to as in like a sort of a down period. It was after the Attitude Era. It was before the kind of start of, I reckon it was probably around 2012, 2013, we started to get a bit of an uptick, and it started to kind of pick up a lot in the UK. So it's kind of in this kind of in-between time. And it was, the passion was there, but I guess the mainstream interest and I guess like almost like pop culture elements weren't really there at the time. But especially kind of mid 2010s and definitely now, it's just doing incredibly well. I just saw last week, Chaos had over 500 people in Bristol. There was a show down the road. Brit King did 150 in the same city, and there was a show the next day in Bristol, SWW, and they had like 200 people. So in Bristol alone, there was almost 1,000 people watching indie wrestling shows in Bristol alone across 2 days, which is just amazing. Like, it's just to even be told that when I started, it would have felt like an impossibility. But now it's just something that just happened on the first week of December or whatever. That's just, and December used to be, years ago, it used to be, oh, don't run shows in December. No one wants to go out in December. I mean, there was even a storm, like a really brutal storm going through the south. There were weather warnings and all kinds of stuff. And, it's just, yeah. So what I'm getting at is that it's in a really good place at the moment. And there's a great fan base, but there's also like incredibly talented and passionate people who everyone's kind of pushing in the same direction at the moment. And there's a lot of collaboration going on. Everyone's trying to help each other out and trying to push forward. And that's something that when I started, that wasn't really the case either. Like, people kind of wanted to just do their own thing and keep to themselves. And there was a lot less of this kind of helping one another out and trying to, just support one another. And it seems that everyone's kind of pushing in that way at the moment more than ever. And it's needed, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, no, of course, absolutely, mate. I see it particularly in the Welsh scene, which I've had many people on from, of that connectivity. Everybody appears on everybody's shows, everybody's going to everybody's training lessons, and it just shows that sense of, community, that everybody gets along and has that ability to learn from one another. And I hear it even from American wrestlers that, like, their dream is always to come to the UK and learn, because there's something about the atmosphere, the style, the presentation about the UK that really appeals to them to be able to learn. What is it you think, Sid, that the UK scene in particular is appealing to American wrestlers wanting to come over and learn this style and learn what UK wrestling is about?
I think it comes from, like, Brian Dixon, All-Star Wrestling. At least to my knowledge, I think he has run more shows than anyone ever in the history of wrestling. He ran for longer. He was a promoter for longer than Vince McMahon, just about. You know what I mean? Like, just before Vince kind of got resigned or whatever he did, like just before, just after Vince resigned and was kind of left WWE, there was a brief period of time where Brian was still heading up All-Star Wrestling, and that made him, a promoter longer than Vince, which is insane, right? But the amount of events that he's run, but like someone like a Bryan Danielson would come over and stay in the UK for maybe 6 weeks. And across those 6 weeks, work 10 matches a week, go home having had 60 matches in front of somewhere between 600-700 and 1,000 people every single match, on the kind of Butlins resorts, and would just go home with so much more of a comfort and a confidence and a feeling of being able to wrestle anyone at any day, any time, because you've had so much experience and so much reps. And like, Brian would use a great team of wrestlers. Like, All-Stars wrestlers were considered by many to be like, some of the best wrestlers in the country. That's what kind of the consensus would be. And the reason that he used such talented people is because he ran so many events. He couldn't take a risk on people not being able to deliver. He needed people who were fantastic. So it's kind of I guess for a lot of people, like myself included, like to say that you worked for All Star Wrestling regularly is like a kind of somewhat of an honor, and like, something that I carry with pride. Someone like William Regal will often refer to Brian Dixon as being a huge part of his development, and also just how he runs events and how he was the most successful and all those kind of things. But anyway, your question about how that the scene is perceived from America, I think it kind of comes from that, and then that idea that we're a much more densely populated place than America, so we have much more events, much more people, with less travel in between. You can get a lot of experience at certain times of the year. You can get a lot of experience in a short space of time with less travel, and we have a really, really rich history and heritage of very technically good wrestlers. Like the technical kind of competence generally across British wrestling is, I'm not going to say it's like higher than America. It's about, what I'm saying is, it's like our style, the European style of wrestling, is just more technically kind of focused. It's less kind of brawling or kind of showmanship at times, and it's more detail and believability and like that catch as catch can, more kind of shoot style of working, and that is something that I think appeals to people from not just America, but also like Japan and all over the world. People come here and want to learn that style and want to learn about holds, and having that confidence and that ability to just go out and wrestle, because that's what a lot of the talent used to do back in the day. Is they would just go out and they would just wrestle, but they'd have such a good foundation and a good understanding of these techniques that wasn't a stress or a struggle for them. It was just, we can do that. We can do 30 minutes. We can do, 6 rounds or whatever it is. And they don't have to, kind of prepare like a grand thing. They can just do it, because they're just so, like I said, the standard and the level was so high.
Absolutely. And that real standard of level is high, even on the technical aspect. You see people like, Zack Sabre Jr., IWGP champion, even won the MVP award in, I believe, Tokyo Sports, one of the first foreigners to do it as well. And that just speaks to the caliber of his wrestling style, obviously being from Britain and adapting that over there. I think it's fascinating with the UK. You could go up to Scotland and see something like a family show or an extreme show, but then even a deathmatch show. Wales, you can see a lot of family shows. And then obviously with London, you get, your Progress and Rev Pros, which are hardcore, strong style. But even something like a Riot Cabaret, where it's a fun, theatric atmosphere as well. And I love going there. So do you think with the UK wrestling, obviously with its, densely populated, everything's all knit together, but it has one of the most vastness of styles, from one show never being like the same?
Yeah, definitely. The variety of, I think that's such a, I guess it's like, and it's getting more and more, like I'm seeing more and more variations on wrestling events, which is just so cool, because like we talked about music earlier, but like, there's no 2 music shows that are the same. There's no 2 like live bands that you go to see that will be the same vibe. There'll be something slightly different. Obviously there's genres, but there's certainly going to be like subtle differences with all of them. And I think that more than ever, there's like almost genres of wrestling shows now. Whereas really back in the day, there was just 2, there was just family show and like more hardcore fan show, but it wasn't even necessarily an over 18 show. It was just like, you'd see AJ Styles on there or something, like, so it was like, but I would still be there as a, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid or whatever. I would still be at those shows that were marketed more towards the hardcore fans, but that were just slightly different, if that makes sense. Like I'm sure there were 18 plus shows back in the day, but they were very, very, very few and far between, whereas now there's much, much more of those out and about. And like, you mentioned deathmatch style and all that kind of thing. There's just so much. And then there's even shows that are kind of taking, like there's a Mythos, which is a guy called Ed, who's like a really creative person who I used to wrestle with about 10 years ago, who created this like play, which is like mythology mixed with wrestling, and it's done incredibly well. And that's on paper, that's still a wrestling show, if that makes sense, but it's like taken on a life of its own. It's this incredible, theater production, and that, but it's like, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's like the shackles are off of wrestling at the moment, and there's like there's kind of no limit to what can be possible at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mythos Ragnarok is a really fun experience. They were up here for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and
yeah,
I attended twice. I had two previous guests of mine, Daisy Jenkins and Molly Spartan, were part of the show. But I think it was just fascinating as well because, you know, when you're a wrestling fan, you kind of expect things, but when it's something like either a male on female move, like someone giving somebody a powerbomb, audience reacting like, whoa, this is something we're not expecting. Or even when they brawl it in the audience and somebody's like, don't make the tag and all that, and using wrestling lingo, it's like, oh, okay, that's very interesting. And the theatrics of it, it's an excellent performance show. But it makes me wonder, what other myths and mythologies could they tackle? They've tackled the Norse mythology. So do you think maybe any other myths, maybe Greek myths, Egyptian myths?
Yeah, they've got to do something with the Greek mythology. It's just there on a plate, especially given that it's like Greco-Roman wrestling. You know, like in the like there's the Greek and kind of Mediterranean part of the world is so like richly linked with like the origins of wrestling as a whole. So it just, I mean, it's on a plate. I think they could do something like that. I think it'd be amazing.
Maybe they could get Adam Copeland for that Percy Jackson series to replay Ares. I mean, that would be the big draw there.
that would be a good casting, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Obviously, the UK scene would continue to thrive, and one company in particular that I've had an association with is obviously Progress Wrestling. I've interviewed the current co-owner, Lee McAteer, on the show before, and I've had multiple wrestlers from Progress, from likes of Mark Haskins to Mark Andrews and many others, just to see what that company means. And Sid, I know you've wrestled for Progress in the past, and was it that you feel Progress brought to UK wrestling that allowed it to become such an ascension platform for UK wrestlers?
I think having so John Briley probably doesn't get as much like flowers as he deserves, because like John was a manager of stand-up comedians, and one of the first people to like really try and like harness marketing and socials and merchandise sales and stuff like that for comedy. You know, it wasn't really that much of a thing. It was on like a big level, but like not really on like a more like, I guess, like independent, I guess you would call it, like a stand-up level. But he did that for a long time. He liked wrestling, you know, but like not like it wasn't like his whole life or anything. Whereas like Jim is like a super hardcore wrestling fan, and that mixed with Glenn Joseph, who was, you know, the Buddy Holly in the West End, you know, that was his background, theatre. So you had this kind of like this combo of like super switched on hardcore wrestling fan, someone with a very, very high level theatre background, and then somebody with amazing marketing experience who handles live events. And that was like that, they were like a super team, you know. Like that's really, to my knowledge, I can't think of a unit that has come along that has been that strong in UK wrestling before or since. Just that versatility within that three. So then when they started, I think the presentation of, you know, the Jim being such a wrestling fan and effectively presenting this show. He was the host, he was the ring announcer, and he would present this show as like, this is me as a wrestling fan putting on what I feel is like the best wrestling show I possibly can, you know. And the fans, I think, could just feel the authenticity of it. And there was nothing else going on like that in London at the time. So it was just there. It was just there at the perfect time. I remember when I saw, like, and you know, like, I'm almost ashamed to admit that when I saw it announced, I was like, that's never gonna go. Like, the Garage, I can't run the Garage. You know what I mean? Because I've seen like some of my favorite bands at the Garage over the years. You know, that's not too far away from where I live. It's not like this mega venue, but just, you know, like I was skeptical. I was just like, Progress Wrestling, like, you know, running at a venue like that, you know, because no one else had tried anything like that. You know, no one else had basically had the kind of the courage to go, let's run a really legit music venue right near central London that's like a cool rock venue, and let's like market it like something really cool and really exciting. And I was just like, it was just so different to what everyone's done. And obviously their kind of blueprint has been an inspiration for so much around the wrestling scene in the UK, and I'm sure internationally as well, where it's like influenced how people brand their promotions and how they, you know, present their shows and everything like that. But I mean, they're just, you know, they hit something at the right time with a great team, and they just rode that momentum. They made good decisions, and they also trusted the talent as well. Like they had the best talent working for them, you know, and when the talent said, "Hey, we think this is a good story," or, you know, "Have you thought about this?" or "You should maybe think about running here," or "You should maybe think about," you know, they trusted the talent to have their best interests at heart, and they had the talent's best interests at heart, and that's a perfect synergy, you know. And, you know, no company's ever perfect, no organization's ever perfect, but they just did. I mean, Wembley, for God's sake, you know what I mean? Like, I was lucky enough to be a part of that show, and like, you know, I never thought I'd be stood in a ring in Wembley Arena. Like, incredible. Like, and in 2018? Yeah, 2018. Like, just to look around and see, you know, a packed Wembley Arena, and that was mind blowing. But then even Alexandra Palace was mind blowing. You know, 2,000 people in Alexandra Palace was like, what? You know, they just did things that no one thought was possible. They did Brixton Academy. No one thought this stuff was possible. I know you might not know these venues because I know you're not from London, but these venues are like venues that you just, you know, I went to see 1975 at Brixton Academy. You know, like you see like Radio 1 mainstream artists at Brixton Academy. You don't see wrestling. You don't see indie wrestling. You know, it's like wildly impressive. So yeah, they're obviously just hugely important to that time that I, you know, that you asked earlier about the British scene as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were talking about the ebbs and flows, like the reason I said 2012, 2013 is because that's literally when Progress moved to the Electric Ballroom. And that for me is like one of the most significant signs of like, okay, now they're selling out 700 tickets every month. It's like, okay, there's really something going on now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was like, that was the memory that I pulled into my mind because they're just so significant with the growth of popularity of wrestling in this country.
Of course, absolutely, yeah. As a Scot, you know, I'm not familiar with the English venues. I rate them by drink prices, and you know, I've got my.
Well, you would hate all of them then.
Oh,
you would hate all of those venues.
$10.50 a pint. That's a crime. That's a crime, Sid.
Oh my God, where was that?
Oh, it was outside the Clapham Grand. It was some pub, and I just looked at it and thought, my card. He's not going to like this. The Bank of Scotland. They don't even take my notes. They'll take my card, but they won't take my notes. It's London. It's a fun place. But obviously, you mentioned the Progress show you appeared on, which was at Wembley Arena. It was Hello Wembley in 2018. Great show as well. But obviously, you know, Londoner yourself said, and you mentioned the opportunity on that show was a real pleasure for yourself. I'd love to know, obviously, I'm watching the show back on Progress On Demand Plus and just seeing the atmosphere. It was like the crescendo to what Progress had built, correct?
Yeah, 100%. And like, it's just a testament to, I think, obviously, that you cannot take away from those three that I mentioned earlier, Jim, John, and Glenn, but just to the talent as well, you know, because there was only, I believe it was Matt Riddle, to me, was like the only really like major kind of import person, even though he'd become a regular on Progress at that point. So it wasn't like he was just like a special one-off, if that makes sense. Ilya was on the show, Walter was on the show, but both of those two were also like fairly regular at as far as like appearing on Ilya, not so much. I think that might have been his debut in the UK, but you know, he wasn't the Ilya Dragunov that was like this world-renowned guy at the time. So it just really felt like they'd managed to achieve something with people from the UK, or at least from the European like scene, and that in itself, you know, because usually when people try and for years, this is what I mean about how they kind of reinvented everything a little bit, because for years and years, if anyone tried to do an arena, they would be getting in ex-WCW guy, ex-WWE guy, ex-TNA guy, or equivalent, you know, to try and like get that kind of mainstream appeal. And there was none of that present in that show. You know, it was a Progress show. And yeah, it certainly was. And the crowd were just unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's with Progress, is that they attempted new things and built a community and fan base, and an integral part of UK wrestling history. Because I know Progress, before they had their championship belt, they had staffs and shields to represent their titles. I mean, creative, but I think it shows that there's always that risk, but also that joy of trying something that's never been done in wrestling, like a staff as a championship. I mean, it's creative. Do you think that shows that there's always a good opportunity of trying something new in wrestling?
Yeah, I think like with all mediums, I'm a big film guy. I like watching films, and I find personally like the weirder an idea, the more interesting I'll find the movie. I watched Moana 2 the other day with my son because he, Disney and everything. That's what you do with your kids, right? And the film was really good. But it was. I said to my partner as we left, I said, I feel like I could have guessed 60% of that film before I even walked in, and I would have been right. Because it's not a bad thing, but it's just exactly what you think you're going to get. Whereas like, I love when people try and mess with things and try and do things a bit differently and kind of shake it up and kind of, and then if it doesn't work, you can just adapt from there. And they ended up with titles in the end. I know I can see from your background that you're a belt guy, so I'm sure you were happy that they made the switch.
Yeah, I'm happy, but my wallet's not. But that's what it is. There's a God.
I think I unveiled that one on the far side, the tag one. I was pulling off the curtain.
Well, maybe we could recreate that and give it more authenticity. That'd be a way to make it really legit.
That was probably one of the most surreal days of my life that day.
Oh, we're gonna get into that, but of course, before a particular brand of NXT, well, there was obviously the United Kingdom tournament, obviously to crown the inaugural WWE United Kingdom champion. Obviously, for somebody who wasn't watching wrestling at that point, probably wasn't even, I was just studying at university at that point still. Just what was the atmosphere and the reception to obviously WWE announcing the United Kingdom Championship and then the tournament?
So it was just a buzz. Like it was just, because that was shortly after the ITV World of Sport announcement. I think that had happened maybe a month or two prior, and they'd announced they were going to do a show on New Year's Eve at 7 p.m, a wrestling show on ITV, which was just like again, another one of those times where you're like, is this really happening kind of thing? And then when WWE did their announcement of that, it was just everyone involved in wrestling in this country was just completely buzzed. And like that day, so that was a progress show the same day on night 2. So night 1 was just a tournament, and then night 2 was the final, but there was a progress show in Birmingham, and I was there for that. I was just I wasn't working the show, I was just helping. I wanted to be around and help with the production side and all that kind of thing. And backstage, everyone was just like, it was like electric, like everyone was just so excited. And like on the way home in the car, we had the phone with the live stream of the network, just seeing it and watching it literally like get stopped in the services. We're all crowding around the phone, like watching as it unfolded live, because it was just, I don't know, it's just so important. And night 1 actually, I think my dad had like a birthday, so he had some people around the house, and I had it again like upstairs in my room live on the TV, and I would just quickly sneak up there and just have a look in and then go back down and hang out with my dad, and then come back up and just see what was going on, and then watch the whole thing afterwards after festivities had ended, just watch the whole thing properly. But yeah, just it just felt unmissable. It felt absolutely unmissable. It felt like everyone was watching, everyone was there. And I remember actually I was refreshing Tyler's I want to say Instagram maybe after he won, like seconds after he won, and he was getting about 500 to 1,000 followers every 30 seconds or something. It was wild. Like I think when I first started refreshing, he was somewhere around 6,000. And by the time, like I maybe did it like 4 or 5 times just because I was with people and I was like, look at this. And by the time I'd stopped, he went from maybe around 6,000 to like 20,000, like literally in the space of minutes, and it was just like, I don't know, just a really significant thing.
Holy shit. Wow. That's mental. The UK tournament is a fascinating aspect of not only, I think, WWE's history, but again, of course, relating to UK wrestling history. You know, I had Flash Morgan Webster, and he talked about how him, Wild Boar, were sitting in the arena at that point and just thinking about like how all of this came about, and it's a true acceptance and really that star-studded point on UK wrestlers getting that showcase on the WWE network, the WWE recognizing the young, thriving talent were there. Do you think with the United Kingdom tournament, it essentially really was the initial boom for highlighting UK wrestling talent?
I think it definitely I wouldn't say it was the initial, but it was like the acknowledgement of what was going on. The boom thing, the phrase boom is like, I guess some people don't like the phrase, someone who I greatly respect and really think the world of and have a lot to thank for, William Regal. I've heard him talk about that because just before the tournament, actually, he visited the UK and checked everything out and stuff, and and you can hear his words on it. I won't misquote him, but the boom, I would say it was more the level of talent and the level of fan base, like the passion from fans and investment from fans in local independent stars had exploded. It wasn't necessarily that there was a huge shift in the overall infrastructure of the industry, but the shift of the quality of what was being put out there had gone up considerably. And then for WWE to even run these events was like a validation, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was the starting point, but it was okay, now the biggest company in the world want to produce a television show here, or want to produce a live special here, and now we're on, some of our guys are on ITV on New Year's Eve. It's just a validation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, from the United Kingdom tournament would spawn NXT UK, obviously announced by Johnny Sane and Triple H, this new brand for NXT, and now this echelon for British wrestling. It's a lovely logo. I mean, it is a beautiful fucking logo. It's just absolutely amazing. But obviously, with NXT UK being formed, and now it's like, wow, this is it. On the WWE network, running shows that fans can attend to. Was this, I mean, obviously, I would love to know the reaction from yourself, Sid, obviously, and knowing that this is NXT UK. Did you hear rumblings about it before, or obviously, how?
So there was a group of guys, and you mentioned Wild Boar and Flash Morgan Webster, who are great friends of mine. I think the world of those guys. I mentioned their Chaos show earlier, so they've already had a kind of a shout out already, but here's another one. They were actually already signed with a group of others, had been signed, and this was around May of that year. So around May of 2018, there was a ton of guys, I want to say 16, maybe it was slightly more, who were signed in addition to the original tournament people. And we knew something was going to happen, maybe another live special, or maybe, but no one really knew exactly what it was. But there were certainly rumblings, and I was working as an extra for SmackDown and Raw in London in May of that of 2018, and I wasn't one of the people who was signed with that group, but I was there. They were all there. They were shooting content. They were doing a bunch of stuff. They were and these are all, most of them are my friends and people I work with all the time. So, you're obviously hearing about everything that's going on, and you're just what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And it was almost one of the most exciting, but one of the most difficult times of my career in a way, because I felt fingertips away from it, but I hadn't quite got there yet. So I'd had my tryout in May 2017. So that was only 5 months after the tournament the first tournament, 5 or 6 months after the first tournament, 5 months, and hadn't been signed, but nobody from my tryout had been signed. And Flash Morgan Webster was on my tryout, and that's kind of where I got to know him really well on a personal level. We'd worked together a bit, but we got to spend like 2 whole days like chatting all day kind of thing. And then, you know, it was a year later from my tryout when Flash and a lot of other talent were signed and I wasn't. So I was like, oh, okay, what do I need to do? You know, figuring out, still in contact with them. As I said, I was working as an extra talent on the Raw and SmackDown. So I was like, well, they must like me in some way because I'm here, you know, I'm here. I'm not signed yet, you know, and I was trying to figure that whole thing out. It was a bit of a mind melter at the time. But then when that was at the Royal Albert Hall, when Johnny Saint and Triple H made that announcement, and I got my phone out, and I had shows in order. They referenced 3 dates and gave it was Cambridge, Birmingham, and Plymouth. There was like dates, and it was 2 dates, and the name of the town. And I had shows on all those days, and I just put in my calendar, I put NXT UK, and then I literally went out of my way to contact the shows that I was on, and I said, I'm gonna go, I've got other stuff I got to do, but I wasn't booked. I just wanted to clear my calendar, and I'd made the decision that I was like, I'm going to book a hotel, and I'm just going to be there. I'm going to be in Cambridge. I'm going to be in Birmingham. I'm going to be at Plymouth. And I decided that even if I don't get the call, at worst, I just go and watch a bunch of my friends wrestle for WWE and put on a great show. But at best, I can email and be like, I'm here. If you need me in any capacity, if you need me to be a security guard, not that I could be a security guard, but, you know, if you need me to be whatever, if you need me to get thrown off the balcony or, you know, whatever you need me to sweep the ring in between matches, I want to be here. I want to be part of the team. And that was my mentality, right? Is that I just wanted to put my best foot forward like that. And then around June time, I get told 2 things in very close succession, actually. I get told, we want to put you on the Wembley show, Progress Day, we want to put you on the Wembley show. And I'm like, wow. And then I get told, we want you as an extra for NXT UK. So I'm like, okay. And they were told, you'll probably have at least 1 or 2 matches. So it wasn't just like I'd been in No Way Jose's conga line, for example, on Raw or whatever, which was, you know, fun. But it was like, it's not like having a match for WWE, you know, they feel very different. So I was like, okay. So then I kind of had this thing like, okay, this is the date I'm working towards. And then after that first Cambridge taping, Matt Bloom, who was my producer for both my matches, I was supposed to just have 1 match, but I had the match with Dave Mastiff on episode 1 of NXT UK TV. And they were so happy with it, and they were so happy with how I was in that match, that they actually changed the taping for the second day to put me in Eddie Dennis's debut match, which I wasn't meant to be in. Someone else was meant to be in that match, and they actually changed the show to put me in because Matt Bloom was so happy with how it went. And then, you know, Matt tells this story, you know, like I hope he won't mind me sharing, but he says that he called Triple H after that weekend, and he said, we got to sign this Sid Scala guy. Like he over delivered. Like, we've got to sign him. Like, he needs to be one of the guys in the team. And then there's lots more after that, but I don't want to run away. I don't want to run away with everything. But you asked me 1 question, I answered about 7.
Hey, that's amazing. Well, Jesus Christ. It shows that you never know where life's going to take you. You do one thing, you get that hotel, and then next thing you know, you're on the first episode, you get the change, you get, you know, Matt Bloom sing your praises to Hunter himself, and it's like, holy shit, that's mental. But of course, you would, you know, get an extra wee role within NXT UK, obviously assistant general manager. What the story is behind that? Was that Matt Bloom singing your praises again? Was it an opportunity that just came to you? What's the story behind the assistant general manager role?
Yeah, so we were in Birmingham. So we'd done the initial 2 days of TV, which was episodes 1 to 6. We'd filmed, and then we were in Birmingham. You know, they'd asked to have me back, and that had coincided with the with the like. No, I'm getting my dates mixed up. That was the Plymouth show. So we're doing these Birmingham tapings, and I don't know what's going on. Like the Matt Bloom calling Triple H thing wasn't something that I found out until a lot later. Like I'm talking like months later. So I didn't know that had happened. I certainly, no one had mentioned a contract to me. No one had mentioned being a permanent part of NXT UK or anything like that. It was, who knows at that point. And then it was at that Birmingham show I wrestled now JD McDonough, and Triple H was at the shows this time, and I got to have a bit of a conversation with him and get feedback and stuff like that. And then it was at that taping that they announced we're going to do a performance centre in the UK, and it's going to be in North London. And I live in North London. So I was like, huh? And then Triple H does this funny thing where he's like, it's going to be in a hey, Kristen, what's that place? And then Kristen, who's an incredible person who worked in talent relations for WWE and still does, and she's just fantastic. Her name's Kristen Altman, and she doesn't get enough praise. She went, Enfield. And he went, Anfield? And she went, no, Enfield. And he went, oh, Enfield. That's where we're going to have the UK Performance Centre. And I'm like literally thinking like, that's where I was born. Like, what's going on? That's where I had my first ever wrestling training session. What is going on? You know what I mean? That's where I watched one of my first like local shows, and Robbie Brookside was in the main event, and now Robbie Brookside stood over there. And what is happening? Do you know what I mean? It was like, is this a dream? Do you know what I mean? Like, what is happening? Like, I couldn't make sense of it at all. It was like the most weird coincidence ever. So then in Birmingham, Johnny Saint, who is like the nicest human being of all time, like became as close as family to me, such a sweet human being, and such a talented person too, like has forgotten more about wrestling than any of us will ever know, and could show you things that you've never seen, heard of, and like has such a great mind for it, and is super good at like the emotional storytelling of the whole thing. But he's just not very good at learning lines, like he's just not, like he's just an older guy. And back in when he was on TV every week, they didn't hand you a script, they didn't hand you lines, you didn't have to do any of this promo stuff really. He could probably count on one hand how many TV promos he did, because I bet it was like 2, so when he was having to make these long announcements, cover a lot of ground, cover a lot of detail, it was difficult for him, understandably so. He's in his 70s. So they were like, we want to get someone with Johnny. And they were trying to figure out who to get. And then Glenn Joseph, I mentioned the 3 from Progress, they were heavily involved in NXT UK's launch. Without them, there probably wouldn't have been in NXT UK anyway. And Glenn, who's the guy who had the more theatre background, he was a big fan and a big supporter of me because of my promos. Because way back before I was wrestling for Progress, before I was wrestling on WWE as an extra and all this stuff, I was doing loads of like out there character stuff. Like I was doing like a Del Boy inspired character, and I was very much like one of these people who was promos online, putting the videos out there, really trying to, put myself out there from a character standpoint. And Glenn had seen that and been a fan of that. And he knew I could talk. And he wanted to let WWE know, hey, I know we're interested in this guy and we want to have him around, and there's a chance that we might sign him, but he's really good at promos as well, just so you know. So like, if you are considering having someone, this might be the guy. So he asked me to get my 3 like best promos together, so he could show them personally to Triple H. So I did. It was like one I did with Chris Hero, who fate would have it we would meet down the road as well. Another one that was like completely different, which was one I actually sent directly to Regal the year before, because the story of how I got my tryout, if I kind of sidebar, is that I got the confidence to finally send a direct email to William Regal, and this was around the time of ITV and everything being announced, and I just wanted to basically put my name out there and be like, I really want to be a part of WWE and whatever. And I sent him one of my Del Boy inspired promos and a match and everything. And then he got back to me within 24 hours and gave me a bunch of feedback, which was really good. Said he liked what he saw, but said that the Del Boy thing won't work in America. So you got to figure out something that's a bit more international, a bit more accessible to anyone from around the globe. So within a few days, I kind of came up with a completely different character and a completely different persona, and then sent a promo based on what his feedback was. And that's how I ended up getting my tryout. I think just having that kind of back and forth where he'd given me some feedback and some advice, and I'd done what he'd said and executed it, and then kind of went back to him with it. And I think that was kind of what gave me the opportunity in the first place. So it was that promo, a Chris Hero promo, and then just like a more like character promo thing, which was just, yeah. And I just, here you go. And then didn't hear anything. We did the opening of the UK Performance Centre, again, like 10 minutes from where I was born, super strange. And I go in there and I shake hands with Robbie Brookside, and he pulls me and he gives me this big hug. And, you know, Robbie's the best. Like, he's one of the best people. But it was a bit out of character for him to just pull me in and give me a big hug. It was lovely, but it was just like, oh, that's really nice, you know. And then I said to him, do you know this is 10 minutes from that judo hall down the road where you coached me I was like 3 weeks into wrestling and you wrestled in the main event? And he's like, yeah, and now look at us, kind of thing. It was like this really, anyway, but he knew what I didn't at the time, which was that about 5 minutes later, I was pulled into an office and I was offered a contract. So on day one of the UK Performance Centre opening, me and I think one other person, it was Nina Samuels actually, who, you know, one of my best friends, was kind of offered a WWE contract on the first day of that place opening. So, you know, I'll never forget that as long as I live.
Now I'm out there human too. Gonna live like animals do. No more laws and no more rules. Nobody knows.